this is Pranav with another video. This time I've decided to start a quick and concise Python series which is going to cover the fundamentals of Python that you need to know in 2020. This course is meant for beginners, but it has a bunch of helpful advice and tips for veteran programmers as well. I created this course to allow programmers, allow beginners, allow people who are interested in the field to learn Python in a fast way, and this is also in part due to my class that I recently started known as Brightcode. You can check it out at brightcode.tech. And I actually started these courses on that website for Python, Swift, and iOS application development. This series that I'm recording right now is kind of like a rehash of that, where I'm going to iterate through all of the things I taught through that online virtual class, but in a recorded format with more edits. So I hope you enjoy. Let's get started. First off, what is this course? Well, like I said, this course is to help people learn Python in 2020 and get you set to start your career, start building applications, start using Python in your day-to-day life. And this is actually going to be a 5-part series, and this is the first video of 5. I'm not sure how long each video is going to be, but it's going to be around 30 minutes to an hour. But let's just get started with this first part then. Before we actually get into learning Python, what actually is Python? Well, Python is a really powerful and general purpose programming language. What that means is that Python can be used for a variety of purposes, anything from building applications to creating a script to automate your daily tasks, or using it for other purposes such as machine learning, which basically includes analyzing data and predicting new results. Web development, which is the creation of static websites and web applications through Django and Flask, which are Python frameworks. And the most important of all, data science and statistics, which involves the analysis and analysis of data and how we're going to apply that to solve problems. Alright, then let's get started with what we're going to do today. We're going to be using REPL.it, which is our online development environment and code editor we're going to be using for this course. We're also going to be taking a look at variables using the console, operators, and concatenation. Let's then just jump in. Right over here in a new tab, I've opened up the REPL.it IDE. You can access it just by typing out repl.it. This is their homepage, and we can actually just start coding by clicking on the Start Coding button in the top right or the middle. I'm going to select the Python language and then just click Create REPL. And boom, here we are. Now, first off, I would like to just preface this by saying, right now, we're not going to be creating some like cool applications with a graphic interface or applying those machine learning or data science applications here. What we're going to start off with is going to be using and learning how to use the Python language first off. Okay, so here we are within our REPL.it code editor, and first off I'm just going to be explaining how we're going to be using this code editor and what it can enable us to do. On the left hand side we have our files panel, where we can actually add files and folders, as well as interact with source control, extensions and packages, our debugger, and other settings. Right now we're going to stick to main.py, which is going to be our main code file. I'll explain this a bit later. Next up, right here in the middle is going to be our code editor, where we can actually type in code, and we can actually hit the run button in the top right here to run our code into the console. Well, what is the console? If you weren't aware already, Python is actually a non-graphical any programming language is technically non-graphical unless you actually create the graphical user interface on your own through the code. So without any graphical user interface, our Python code is just going to run in the console. That means that all we're going to do is interact through these text-based commands over here on the console, and our code will also output things to this console right over here. So all of our interaction within this course is going to be within this console right here. Now let's get started with actually typing out Python code. The first thing we're going to cover is going to be variables. Now, what are variables? Well, you can think of variables as a form of a container or a box of sorts, where the variable is the box and you can store whatever type of information you want it within it. This can be anything from text or numbers and other type of data types that we will cover shortly. But what you can't cover right now, at least, is going to be like images and like physical things. We're just talking in the quantitative realm right here in our 2D realm, so you can't obviously contain 3D elements and that sort of thing, but I think it'll be explained a lot more as we start typing out our code. The way we're going to create a variable is going to be the same way we do it within math. For those that know, you can create a math variable by typing out like some letter or some identifier, then typing out an equal sign, and then the value that you want to be stored within this letter. So you could say x equals 7, and right now the value of 7 is stored within x. This is a valid variable within Python as well, but the only difference is Python can store different sort of text as well and other data types. The first data type we're going to take a look at is going to be the string. Let's say we want to store a string in S. And what is a string? Well, it's actually a form of text. So if you'd want to store any letters or words or sentences, anything related to text, say hello world, it needs to be encapsulated with these double quotation marks so that Python knows that it is a string and not just some random text. What I mean by this is, if we were just to write something right here like Bob, this would automatically be an error because Python doesn't know if that's code or if it's text or what it is really. So instead, if we encapsulate this with these double quotation marks, Python knows that it's going to be a string. Let's change that back to hello world. We can also store these variables within non-letter identifiers. All it needs to be is some sort of identifier without any spaces. You could do something like name and do let's say John within this. Alright, so what we're storing here is the string John within the variable called name. And this equal sign right here isn't what you would think within math. Instead, in Python, it is used as an assignment, and it designates that this value on the right hand side is assigned to this variable, or vice versa, I guess. That name is assigned to this value. Thus, wherever I'm going to be using this name variable, this value within it is automatically going to get substituted within the variable. We'll see an example of this shortly. But aside from these two data types, we also have another one known as the float. And what this means is it's basically a form of decimal numbers. And the difference between this right here, this x variable, and the float data type is going to be that x is actually storing an integer. And for those that have studied math, you probably know that integers are whole numbers. So anything from like negative infinity to positive infinity, but they all have to be whole numbers, right? It could be something like negative 9, that's an integer. And it could also be something like 1024, that's also an integer. But another type of data type would be the float, where it's actually a decimal value instead. You could do something like pi equals 3.14, and that's a float. Now you might be wondering, why is there a need to differentiate them like this? Well, that it's mainly due to rounding reasons. Say you want to actually round this number, or if you don't want to round it, you can actually convert between a float data type and an integer data type. So if I were to convert this float into an integer, it would automatically round to being 3. Another reason is just to quantify your values into different types for use in your data analysis and data science as well. Floats allow a large degree of precision, while integers do not. Like, you could continue this to be like much longer. I'm not sure if I actually got that right, but something like this long, it's a lot more precise than just 3. Like, let's say this was just 3. This value right here is a lot more precise. The last data type we're going to take a look at is going to be the bool. We're going to be covering a lot more data types in the future, but for now we're just going to stick to these 4. It's known as the bool, all lowercase by the way. And what the bool stores is going to be true or false values. What I mean by this is either true or it's going to be false. And let's say we're going to check if the glass, let's say I have a glass and we want to check if the glass is full or not. In that case, I'm going to create a variable called full and set it to false at the moment. But later on within our code, we're creating like a water logging app or something. If someone adds in an input saying that the glass has been full, you can actually modify that to be true instead. This allows us to check if something is true or false really fast and really conveniently. And this works with other types of operators as well. I mean, other sorts of variable identifiers as well. Now, aside from that, now we're going to move on to operators. And now there's a lot more operators dealing with variables, but let's first look at some operators that I'm sure you're familiar with. Let's actually remove this part over here. And let's say we want to add 2 numbers together. For example, 13 plus 64. We could do this, and now x actually stores 13 plus 64. But how do we know that the calculation has been performed correctly or not? That's where debug and the console comes in. Right now we haven't actually used this console on the right hand side at all. Let's do that right now. We can actually print out elements to this console by typing out print and then adding in 2 parentheses facing each other, and then inside of this we're just going to add in our value that we want to print out. In this case we want to print out x, which is storing 13 plus 64. And now if I were to run this, we would get the expected result 77. Now that our example has worked, I'm just going to briefly touch a bit more on print before we move back on to operators. First off, print is something known as a function. What is a function? Well, a function is also a math term, and a function is something that takes in an input and outputs something else, or at least performs some sort of action with it, right? Here, our print function is taking in the input of x, and what it is doing is printing out x to the console on the right hand side. We're going to be exploring functions a lot more in depth in the next few parts of this course. Aside from that, we can also print out a lot of different elements, but functions mostly print out strings. Print mostly prints out strings. Sorry about that. Let's say we have a variable called name, and inside of this we're keeping John as usual. We can actually print out name, and it would work as expected. Instead of using a variable here, you can also just add in the value on your own right here as a string, and that would work. Why is this happening? Okay, whoops. But so we can add in an element right here, a string right here, right, called hello world, and it would print out just as expected. And you can also add in your other data types right here as well. such as a float that would print out, and just an average integer would work as well, say 101. That would work as well. But I think that's a bit enough of print. We're just going to be using print now to justify all of our operator operations from now on. Here, let's test out another operator now, the subtraction sign, also known as minus. Let's say we want to subtract 36 from 100. We're going to get our expected result just as expected. But here's where it gets a bit more complex. So next up, the operator we were going to discuss is going to be multiplication. But as for multiplication, we can't actually use the x symbol to mean times in this situation. Say in normal math, what you would do would be 10 times 5 or something like that. But within Python, since x is actually part of your letters, you're not going to be able to use x. Instead, we're going to substitute x with a symbol, and the symbol is actually going to be the star symbol. It is available over the number 8 on your keyboard. I think it should be at least. And this symbol just substitutes for times or multiplied by. So what we would actually get is 10 times 5, which should be 50. Let's print it out. And we get 50, our expected result. The same problem exists with the divided by symbol as well. Here, the problem is that the division symbol that we are familiar with seeing in math is actually not found on the keyboard at all, on at least most keyboards. So instead, we're substituting that symbol with the // right here. And instead, what we can do with this operator is just substitute it for that division symbol, and what it would mean is 50 divided by 10, at least in this example. Now if we were to print, we would get 5, and that's exactly what we get. But here's a quick reminder, or a quick note, I guess. If you look at this result right here, we get 5.0 instead of 5. Even though we're dividing by integers on both sides, where we should get 5, we're getting a decimal response of 5.0. The reason for this is it is automatically done by this division operator. Say, for multiplication or other results, if you were to multiply two integers, you would always get another integer. But for dividing two integers, you don't always get an integer. Say, if I were to divide 22 by 7, what we would get would be 3.14. Right, so this value right here is actually a decimal value, and because this division operator can a lot of times result in decimals, it automatically converts the result into decimals either way. So even if we were to do a non-decimal division, such as 50 divided by 10, we would still get a decimal because Python automatically converts it that way. Just a note. Now let's move on back to a couple other operators that I'm not sure if everyone will be familiar with. But first off is going to be the power operator. This includes 2 to like the power of 3. That's an example, or something like 3 to the power of 3, which would be 27, right? And the way we can accomplish this within Python is going to be by first typing out the number that you want to actually power by, I guess. And then you actually have to use another symbol, which is going to be the star symbol. I guess it's just the star symbol twice. And in Python, this is what indicates power. And after these two stars, we're going to add in the actual power that we're going to multiply 2 by. And let's say we're going to 2 to the power of 3. So what this statement would mean is actually going to be x equals 2 to the power of 3. let us just run this, and we get our result 8, just as expected. We can do this for other operations just to check it out. So 3 to the power of 4, which should be 81. That works as well. And the last operator we're going to take a look at is going to be the Modulus Operator. Now this is a bit more of an advanced concept, so I'm not sure if everyone will be aware of this, but the Modulus Operator is used for getting the remainder when you're doing a division operation. For an example, if you're dividing 9 by 2, the remainder would be 1, because you could do 8 divided by 2, and that would be 4, and 9 is just 1 over 8, so there would be a remainder of 1. I'm sure everyone gets this concept. So if you wanted to actually find this out though on a simpler way and just get the remainder, the way we can do this is by typing out the percentage sign and then 2. And right now, if I were to run this, what we would get is going to be 1, just as expected. Instead, if we did something like 10 divided by 3, 10 mod 3, we're going to get 1 once again. Now this is a bit more of a complex operator, and the use cases of using this operator is going to be when we want to check if a number is even, or if a number is divisible by 3, or if it's divisible by 5, that sort of thing. And in a lot of programs you might actually want to check that, so it's kind of useful later on. But that's about it for operators, at least our numerical and arithmetic operators. Next up, what we are actually going to check is going to be more with the console. First off, now that we've actually learned how to use print, and we can actually add in our values to the console, such as hello world, right? When we run this, we can input something to the console. But now, what if we wanted to get input from the console, or input from the user of our program? The way we're going to accomplish this is by typing out input, just as we did with print, and adding these 2 parentheses. Now, input is actually another function just like print, and so we're going to need some input and some output. The input and output are actually all optional, but the way we're going to actually access this output is by storing this value of input within a variable. What I mean by this is, let's say we create a variable such as this by typing out I and then an equal sign, which is assigning this value on the right hand side to the left hand side. So what this is doing is assigning the value of the input to the variable I, and what Python does here is going to be by calling this function called input, then it is going to ask us like a prompt right here in the console. Then we're going to type in some sort of input here, then Python is going to return that input over here and store it within I. For an example of this, let's actually remove this part and print out I instead. Let's run this code real quick. Right here, this is actually a text prompt. Now, because we don't have any question here, we weren't really aware that easily, but we're gonna fix that very soon. Right now though, I can type in something, say hello. This is all me typing on the right hand side, and when I type this out, it's actually going to return that back to me, exactly what our program right over here is going to do. But now, what if instead of just having a blank prompt over there, what if you want to ask a question to the user which they can answer, or some sort of like form response, that sort of thing. The way we're going to accomplish this is by going within these parentheses of the input function and adding some input to this input function. That's a bit complex, but what I mean is, here we can actually assign a question/prompt to the user by adding an input to this function, just as we did with the print. Here my input is going to be, what is your name? right, and let us actually run this code real quick. And right now, after we've run, we get the prompt just as expected. What is your name? And right here we have our cursor, so that means we can type. And let's say we want to type out my name, which is Pranav. And right now if I were to print, it would just print out my name. But let's spice things up a little bit. Let's actually change this part over here to name to make it a bit more make the naming sense a bit more friendly, I guess. And here, what if we want to put something together with name? Say we want to actually greet the user by saying hello with their name. The way we can accomplish this is by typing out hello in the form of a string. Then, just as we added numbers, in Python you can actually add strings together as well. And so we can actually add just a plus sign right here. And this is going to accomplish the act of adding together two strings. That means that this input function actually is going to return a value that is a string, and it's going to be stored within name. So as an example, I'm going to type it out over here. What is actually happening is this hello string is over here, and name, whatever is contained within name, say Pranav, these two are going to be added together, which is going to result in hello Pranav right here as a complete string altogether. To see this result occurring, let's actually remove this and run our code, and we will see that our hypothesis is indeed correct. We get the expected result. Now let's actually replace my name with some other name, just check if it works for other names as well. And indeed we get the same result as before. Now this input is actually very beneficial in getting user input and using it within our programs for numerous purposes. Anything from sorting through users, or creating a format, creating a quiz game. There's thousands of different options, and you're free to explore any of your, free to experiment around with the possibilities. But aside from that, let us quickly look at one last topic for this part of our series. This is actually going to be concatenation, and what this means is adding together two different data types. Let's say we have a string here, call it hello, and would it make sense to add the string together with a number? No, not at all. Right, first off, the only way you can add two different data types together would be if they're both the same data type. So in this case, you can either convert one of the elements. We could either convert the string to an integer, but that wouldn't make sense at all, right? We can't actually convert hello into a number unless we're doing something with Unicode and ASCII or something, but that doesn't really make sense in this scenario. But instead, we can convert this number to a string, and what that would entail would be actually adding these double quotation marks to this integer, and then that would result in the string hello 34. Now that doesn't really make sense, but let's actually switch this example with something like your age is, with space at the end, and then the other string called 34, and this would result in something like your age is 34 right here as a complete string. Now let's accomplish a simple program which we're going to actually use this conversion tactic in. Let's switch name around for age, just as the example before, and let's actually switch this prompt to how old are you. And now, right now, if I were to just print this out, this would indeed work, because right now our input function is going to be returning a string. Right now, if I were to run, you would get, say I type this out, you would get your age is 14. But what if I wanted to use age as an integer and then convert it back into a string later on? let me just give you an example. What if we were to create a program that would take someone's age and multiply it by 20 and return back to them? The program itself is kind of useless, but it's just as an example. The way we're going to accomplish this is by first, let's just actually create a new variable for ease of use. And the way we're going to convert age into an integer is by typing out int, and then these parentheses, and then putting age within it. Int right here is actually another function, and what this function accomplishes is converting a string into an integer, and the only parameter, I guess, for this function would be that the string cannot be something like hello, it has to be something with an integer within it. Say something like 14. So this function called int would essentially take off these double quotation marks and return 14, because now we can actually use our operators with this value right here. Instead, if it was something like text, like even if it was a number within the string, it's still classified as a string. So if I were to like multiply this, what would essentially occur would be something like 14, 14, 14, 14, 14. That's what Python does when you multiply a string. It's just multiplying the string out and creating a new string with the original string just 10 times. That's kind of wasteful. Instead, what we want to do is actually multiply the integer value by 20. And now that we've gotten the integer value of age, we are going to multiply that by 20 in this case. And now we can actually print that out here. But here is the problem. Now if I were to run this and type in 14, we're getting an error right here. The problem is right now your age is a string, and right here this number is, this variable a right here is actually an integer. This is a problem because right now we can only add together strings or add together integers, and in this scenario we want to add together these two strings instead. So the way we're going to do that is the same way we converted this string to an integer. We're going to convert this integer to a string by typing out str and then these two parentheses and putting a within it. Right now what this accomplishes is converting this integer to a string. So essentially, once again I'm going to show an example. Age is right now, what it was trying to accomplish before would be something like this, but we can't add together an integer and a string. And for this, I remember strings are just text, right? But instead now with this function we're going to add these two double quotation marks to it so it can be added, and we will get our result. And if you remember, we are actually just getting our input, so it varies. I'm just using 14 as an example, but it varies depending on the input. Let me just space that out a bit better. Okay, now let's actually run our code. And I'm actually going to modify this. That makes a bit more sense. Let me stop this real quick and run it again. Click clear. If I can run this again. Something is broken here. Oh, okay, now it finally worked. So now if I were to type in 14, I would get your age times 20 is 280. So our program successfully works. And with that, I think that's a good place to stop the class for today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and stick out for the next few parts over the next few days. We're going to finish up Python, then I'm actually going to release another course on Swift, learning the essentials of Swift really quick in just 5 days. All you need to do is spend around 30 minutes each day. We're going to cover all of the basics, essentials, all of that. Then after that, I'm going to release a flurry of iOS application development videos as well. And if you're interested, you can check out my new unlicensed nonprofit organization called Brightcode. It's available at brightcode.tech, and that's where we're actually releasing these online classes that I'm now converting to videos right now. But with that, thank you for watching the video. If you're still here to the end, thank you so much. Please like, share, and subscribe. That would be great. And make sure to hit the bell to receive notifications for all my future uploads as well. Thank you and cheers.